Yes, I can hear you.
Hi everybody, sorry for the delay. Have a bit of audio trouble on my end. If you can hear me, please set your status to red so that I know my audio is working now. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is our weekly webinar. I'm your guest host for today. I'm Jimmy Rishe, InfoPath MVP at Qdabra. And today I'll be talking about localization and data-driven design. We're now starting. It's 8:05. I will be giving a short presentation on data-driven design and more specifically data-driven localization, followed by a demo on how to localize your forms. And then I'll take questions and answers on any InfoPath topic you'd like to ask from 8:25 to 8:45. So let's get started. Okay, so what is data-driven design? Well, in the context of an InfoPath form, data-driven design means basically designing your forms to be smarter and do more for you with less work from you. It means designing them so that depending on the inputs or the data that you stored in their data sources or are retrieving into the data sources, the forms can behave differently without having to hard code all the logic into the view, without having to hard code values into the views. Basically, having the form working smarter, not harder. Of course, data-driven design has a lot of benefits. In the short run, it usually takes a little more effort to come up with a smart design rather than just going at it. But once you've done that, what you'll usually find is that in the long run, it saves you a lot of time when you need to make some changes to your form. Often, you can change the form's behavior just by modifying a data file instead of having to go through the designer and drag around controls and resize them and things like that, which is always a hassle. Likewise, it can simplify form maintenance, and having a smart design often means that the form logic is more streamlined. It makes more sense, and you don't have to modify it as often. The idea is design once, update often. You lay out the controls of the logic one time, and after that, of course, there will always be changes to those to some extent, but for the most part, you can change your form just by modifying its inputs, and you can expand your form's possibilities. You can design a form such as a survey form, and if instead of hard coding all the questions and answers into the form itself, you can design a form where it retrieves the list of questions and a list of answer choices from a data file, and that way you can make as many of those forms as you want just by swapping out the contents of the data source. It saves you lots of time. So, data-driven design within the context of localization. I'm sure you can imagine a non-data-driven localization design whereby you would just basically place expression boxes or buttons, or one each for every piece of text on your form, one of each of those for every available language. Then use some conditional formatting to hide or show the appropriate one, depending on the current language. Of course, this would be very tedious. It would take a lot of time. The view design layout would be a mess. And supposing you wanted to add a new language to your form, that would mean adding one new expression box, one new button for every expression box and button on your form. So what we want to do is something that's a bit smarter than that. So the idea is that you define an XML format for the different strings that will be represented in your forms. You can either write this by hand or use InfoPath to also come up with that XML. I'll be using InfoPath in this demo. So you'd have a repeating field in that XML, and within each group of that repeating group, you would have one of each string that you want to show in your form. So you'd have one set of those strings for one language, another whole set for the next language, and as many of those sets as you want for as many languages as you want to use. You'll take that XML and add it to your main form as a secondary data source, as a resource within the file that it loads when the form is opened. And you can reference the source and dynamically switch between the languages just using some fancy XPath. Well, I wouldn't say that fancy. So here's the language input form that I came up for this demo. Use InfoPath. This allows you to use a form to manage the localization strings that you're using. Here we have the strings part of the form. Here I have English selected on the left, and it's displaying all the different English string values. And then when Japanese is selected, it has the Japanese values. So the details of how this XML works. So we've got our localization data source. It's showing main because this is the form for managing the strings. So it's main within that form. So we've got a selected language field up here at the top, which in the host form will represent the language that's currently selected, the one that's currently shown. Then we've got a repeating group of available languages. It just lists out all the ones that the XML has been modified to support. Basically, a code field, which would be a two-letter code for the language, and then a display field, which would be a readable name for the users to view. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you have this big set of strings, which just lists out each of the different strings you want to display in your form. And then each of these groups will have a lang attribute to indicate which language that particular instance of the group represents. So to add this to your form, you take that XML that you've created, add it as a secondary data source, first of all, and then you will add a drop-down to allow users to select which language they want to display. This is bound to that selected language field I showed you in the previous slide. Then, and this is a slightly involved step, you'd go through the form replacing the labels on your fields with basically calculated value boxes most of the time, which will just, they'll be bound to the corresponding field in the localization data source, and just use a simple filter to only show the one where the group where the lang attribute matches the value in the currently selected language field. You do the same for button labels, drop-down box choices, alerts, and then you're basically all set. And here's what we get. So Before I move on to the demo, I just want to mention InfoPath Dev, our form. We've had this form live since 2003. We have dozens of users a day coming to ask InfoPath questions, and several MVPs ready to answer your questions. So if you haven't visited yet, I sure hope you'll drop by. We also offer some more intensive training. We have Quick Start training, which is a week-long course, 30 minutes a day, relatively inexpensive to get you up and going with InfoPath. And then we have a deeper, more intensive course, which is also 5 days a week long. And this will tell you all the ins and outs about InfoPath. So if you're interested in either of these, I recommend visiting one of these two URLs. Okay. So now to move on to the demo. So this is the localization management file, management form that I was mentioning earlier. So here is a view for managing the languages within the form. I can enter a new language here. And then down here I have this default language drop down to select from which language I want displayed when the host form is initially opened. From there I can go to the localization strings view. So here again this is bound to that repeating group of all the strings, so this is a list of all the languages. So I can just add another row here and pick French, and now I'm ready to add French strings to my form. I'll just add one string there. So pretty simple. Here is the group I was referring to earlier. Just a list of all the strings that I want to show in my expense report. And here, down here, we have a repeating group which will populate a drop-down box of expense categories. So now to go about actually using the XML created in that form. I've already gone ahead and used that form to create this XML. I'll open it up in Notepad. It's not that pretty to behold in Notepad. So this is what I just showed you earlier. So to add this to your form, as I mentioned earlier, we will first add it as a data connection. I'll just grab this path here. All right, now I've got that in my form. So I will split this out into a table so that I can have the drop-down right justified up here in the header. I'll drag this in, create a drop-down. Selected language, again, is the field that will hold the language that I'm currently displaying. So I want to populate this from a list of available languages. So I'll just pick that. The value will be the language code, which would be EN, JS, SP, or ES. And the display name would be the name of the language I want to display. And I'll reduce this to 50% size and justify. So there I have this drop down here. So now what I would do is I will take each of these fields and drag them in as a calculated value. Or rather, I will create a calculated value box. Select the field I wanted to display. So in this case, it would be the form title. Click Filter. So I want to filter, show the row where lang in the row is equal to the selected value field, selected language field. Simple as that. Okay. In order to preserve formatting, it often helps to insert it in the middle of your text. So as you can see here, I've inserted it between the R and the T, and it's still got the right size, the bold, and when we preview it, we'll see it's got the right colors and everything. So I'll do the same for a few more of these. Work date. Filter. Okay, so there we have that. And one other way of going about this that you might consider is you can just copy the expression box, paste it here, then go into the properties, click Edit XPath, and modify this value to this field name to be the one you actually want to display in this case. So it would be expense code. I have one for expense code. And let's add one more for employee information. Notice that this approach also preserves the formatting, as long as I paste it in the midst of the text there. So this will be setting up a drop-down is pretty similar. Want to populate it from that data source. So I'll take the values from this expense category repeating group. And here again, I will filter based on lang is equal to selected language. Display name will be display. Same goes for button. This filter lang is equal to selected language. So it involves a little bit of work, but the time savings in the long run and the nice tight design will make it worth all the effort. So I'll just hit preview on this. So here we have English, pick Japanese, and here it switched out those fields that I modified. These two here, category drop-down like that, and the submit button. Same goes for Spanish. Okay, so I know we've reached our time limit already, but I've got one more thing to show you. So let's say you wanted to add a new string to this system. You'd go back into the utility, add a new field. We'll call this submit message. So it's a message that'll show when the form is submitted. So I've added that to this repeating group now. Go to the language strings view and add a new row here. Go below. Just drag this in as a text box. So here in this form, I've set up my the file I'm working with as the file that it uses in preview mode. So it'll just load that right back up when I preview it, and then I'll save it back to the same location. You could do that if you like, or you could do something a bit more sturdy, like publishing it out to somewhere and loading the file from a specific location. That's up to you. So here I'll preview the form. I've got my 3 language sets. Here, as I didn't note earlier, we have this categories repeating group. The values should be the same for each language, and then the display values would be different in each case. So as we see, the values behind are the same. And the display values are different. Okay, so now that I've entered that in, I will save this out. This path here. Okay, so that's saved. I'll open up my my finished product expense report that has all of the strings switched out already. I'll go here and add a rule. Show success. So here it's showing a static value, so I'll modify this to use a formula instead. And just the same as before, we'll pick the field. Oops. Okay, before I do that, I have to update this data connection. Alright, let's do that one more time. There we have it. Filter. Okay. So as you can see, when I click the submit button, it shows the message in the appropriate language, and then I have a rule to close the form. So one remaining little detail that's hanging on is this add expense text here that's on the repeating table. Unfortunately, it's not possible to modify these to be dynamic. If you're a real stickler and want to localize these as well, what you can do is remove the ability to add and remove rows from this table and replace it with a button that looks just like this, except it has the text localized, and then it could use Q rules to insert rows into the form. That would actually also mean having to add buttons to remove rows or remove them up and down, but it's definitely something to consider. So that's it for my presentation. So I'd like to open up the floor for questions, and please let me know if you have anything to ask.